I want to talk about Ill Communication because when that came out, it was such a soundtrack. I just listened to it a lot at the time, and it's one of those records, albums that becomes the soundtrack for that time in your life, which is, I think, a hard thing to achieve. But I think everyone who was my age or obviously younger who heard that at the time was like, okay, these are the songs that sort of imprint on us at that time. And I remembered I guess I would have been in New York at the time. And I know that you came from New York. We've talked about that. And you've said before that the New Yorker grew up in, like the Boston I grew up in, there's no iPhones. You're not listening to your music that way. And this is probably much more true in New York than it was in Boston. Music's coming at you from all these different places out on the street, and that was instrumental, no pun intended, to how you guys formed.
Yeah. I don't think our story is unique, that unique. I feel like that's sort of how things, especially bands, start. You're into this thing and you're hearing things and you find friends that are into the same sort of thing and you move along that way. But something special about being in New York is that you do hear it. We talked about it a lot. Like you walk down the street, just getting from from here to there, you're hearing, music from the pizza place. You're hearing, somebody drives by with the radio or whatever. Like you're hearing all this music. And I feel like our time was an interesting time to grow up in, like, mid 70s to hear radio. It was a great time for radio, right? Like we had the one station would play like David Bowie and the Stylistics and, and whatever. It'd be like everything would be playing. And so all of those influences, and in New York, you'd go uptown, you hear like, when we were little kids, we'd hear salsa and boogaloo coming from radios and, punk rock from the east side or whatever, you know what I mean? All these different sounds. And it formed us as kids growing up. And so we took that with us. And I think, us as friends, and like we all do as friends, like it's not just about the one thing. Like we all talk about the TV shows. So like we write rap lyrics. So of course we're going to talk about Chef Boyardee, and we're going to talk about The Odd Couple, and we're going to talk about all this dumb stuff. That's, not dumb, pretty dumb, but it was important to us.
Well, it's genius when you look back at it now. Like we all talk about, like, oh my God, The Odd Couple is one of the best shows ever created.
But
made,
I
whatever.
appreciate it too, because there were so many. You drop in so many things, like you had that, because I think we're a similar vintage. I remembered when you guys rhymed Rod Carew, and I'm like, who's talking about Rod Carew anymore? Pinch on the neck of Mr. Spock. There's all this stuff that was evocative of my growing up in the 70s, and your kind of respect for it. I remember too when I would go to New York. This is something that was also true. Is that the times I lived there, when you got in a cab, you were listening to the music that cab driver was listening to, which often was not top 10.
Right.
So anytime you entered a space, you were inundated. People talk about how we're siloed now. Everyone's listening to the music that they exactly want to hear through their, iPods.
AirPods.
Yeah.
Ear goggles.
iPods.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You don't have to exacerbate it.
Sorry.
You could just sort of
You
help
said
me.
iPods. You meant AirPods.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
This is why we don't get anything from Apple. This is why they don't send me any shit.
The ear thing
I
is
mispronounce Ferrari all the time. But anyway, I think you're part of a stew. You have no control over it.
Well, I agree, and I think New York was unique. I have to admit, I only know New York, but I do think New York, because you had music blasting at you from all sides and all different kinds of music. So I have to think that at that time that was different than Boston or Rhode Island or anywhere else on the East Coast and beyond. New York really was the place that exists probably in the whole globe at that time, where you had all this different music happening at the same time, all being blasted at you. And then I think also then it's an interesting thing, like what you brought up, of that, I don't know, I guess it's maybe just that we all grew up in the 70s. Like as kids, we were left alone, literally left alone. And there were only 3 channels or 4 or 5 channels, or, it was a huge deal. I remember when my parents got the cable box. That was
huge.
That
like
was
going into
huge.
hyper warp.
Yeah, being able to turn. You have the box where I could turn beyond the 3 channels or 4 channels or whatever. That was huge, and being able to watch like the Knicks and Rangers games.
Back
huge.
when there were 3 channels, this is, you know, there's ABC, CBS, NBC. There's like 2 UHF stations, and I've mentioned this before, but we would watch what came in. Meaning, what did we have good reception on? And once it was a Catholic mass, but the picture was really good. So my brothers and I, just like, because we don't have the palette that people have today. I remember just thinking like, well, you know, this is not what we want to watch. But God,
is it better or worse than F Troop? Do you know what I mean? Like, we're just watching. It's just the electricity. It's like, it's just all we need is the electricity.
Don't diss F Troop. That's
Rat Patrol. I don't know any Mr. Ed. I don't know any random show. You know what I mean? No offense.
Yeah. What was there?
Sorry. I didn't know you.
I'm so happy you mentioned Rat Patrol.
I don't know. What
3 Nazis fighting 3 American GIs in the desert, and it's only the same 6. Every fucking episode.
That's the show?
That's the show. They're just driving around in the desert.
Wait,
shooting
which
each
is
other.
what was the Colonel Klink show?
That's Hogan's Heroes.
Hogan's Heroes. Like, think of it. That's pretty insane. That like every day after school we'd watch Hogan's Heroes, which is like this, you know, sort
funny,
of like
it's funny shit.
It's a comedy.
A comedy about, and they said it was a POW,
concentration camps.
a POW camp, not a concentration camp, a POW
you're
camp.
You're right.
So that's why it was funny.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.